The air was heavy with sawdust and something else I couldn't name. His hands hovered near the drawer handles he'd just installed, the new kitchen barely lit by the amber hue spilling in from the hallway. I stood at the edge of the island, pretending to inspect a crooked cabinet door. He moved closer, slowly, like he didn't even realize it. Our eyes met. Neither of us blinked. There was this split second, maybe less, where time knotted itself between what we wanted and what we knew better. Then came the sound of the front door slamming open. A voice. My husband's voice. I forgot the blueprints. We both jumped back like guilty schoolkids caught near the cookie jar. I turned, quickly, wiping non-existent dust off my hands, pretending I hadn't just been moments away from unraveling everything I'd spent years building. But that wasn't the beginning. No, the beginning came earlier, on a Thursday before Thanksgiving, when the kitchen was still old, the walls still yellowed, and my life still intact. Before I begin the story and tell you how everything really happened, answer this question: would you be able to forgive a loved one's betrayal? Thanksgiving was supposed to be quiet this year. That's what my husband said. Just us, he'd promised, pouring himself another cup of coffee before rushing off to the construction site he managed across town. He'd been doing that a lot lately, saying we needed to slow down while working even more. I'd stopped trying to explain the irony. It was early November when his younger brother arrived. Just for a week or two, my husband had said. He needs a place to land while he figures things out. Apparently, figuring things out meant sleeping until 10 and leaving half-eaten takeout on the counter. He brought noise into a house that had grown far too quiet. The day he arrived, I'd just returned from Trader Joe's, juggling 2 paper bags full of pumpkin-spiced nonsense and a bottle of mid-shelf Pinot Grigio. He opened the door before I could ring the bell, grinning like he already belonged there. Still carrying your own groceries? Shame on him. I rolled my eyes, pushing past him. He's working overtime. So am I, he joked. Working overtime on my recovery from life. That first night, I set up a guest room, fluffed pillows, straightened the hallway picture frames twice. My husband got home late again. They laughed together like teenagers, loud enough to rattle the light fixtures. I stayed upstairs, folding laundry that didn't need folding. The next morning, I found him in the kitchen, shirtless, holding a cup of my husband's favorite coffee, brewed in my favorite mug. He pointed at the outdated linoleum floor and said, "You know, if this were my house, I'd gut this kitchen and start from scratch." I smirked. Funny. I've been saying that for years. That's how it started. The kitchen became a project. The project became an excuse. Within a week, we were knee-deep in paint samples, watching YouTube tutorials on countertop resurfacing and making daily trips to Home Depot. We debated butcher block versus marble like it mattered more than mortgage payments. He made me laugh more than I had in months. Maybe longer. One afternoon, while rearranging pantry shelves, he asked me about my career. I hesitated before answering. No one had asked in years. I used to run a little design blog, I admitted. DIY makeovers. Then life got busy. He nodded, crouching to pry a warped floorboard. Maybe it's time to make something for you again. That night, I dreamt I was painting a kitchen that wasn't mine. 3 days before Thanksgiving, my husband announced he'd been pulled into an emergency job up in Stamford. It's only for a few nights, he said. Back before Thursday. I nodded, pretending not to count the dinners I'd be alone with his brother. As soon as his car left the driveway, silence settled like fresh snow. The next morning, his brother suggested we demo the upper cabinets. Let's just go for it, he said. He won't mind. It's not like he's the one doing it. He wasn't wrong. I grabbed a hammer. By noon, there was drywall dust in my hair, splinters in my palms, and laughter echoing off the exposed beams. It was ridiculous. Messy. Freeing. We worked side by side, pulling down decades of kitchen decay, layer by layer. Somewhere between the broken tiles and crooked screws, I forgot to feel guilty. Until that evening, when we collapsed on the living room floor, surrounded by floor plans and paper coffee cups, and he looked at me, really looked. Your eyes change color when you're tired. I stood up, instantly. I'm going to bed. You're allowed to be tired, he said, softly. You're allowed to want something new. I closed my bedroom door that night but didn't sleep. My head swam with colors that weren't on the walls. The next morning brought fresh chaos. A neighbor knocked to drop off a pie and asked, too casually, how long the renovation would take. Looks like you two are making great progress, she said with a raised eyebrow. I smiled too tightly and said we had help. Just family. That word burned in my mouth. Later that day, he offered to move the fridge to prep for new flooring. I said it could wait. He insisted. As we braced the heavy machine together, he slipped, and I caught his elbow. We stood there, frozen, breathless. I backed away first. That evening, we sat on the back steps, watching squirrels fight over acorns. The wind tugged at my sweater. He handed me a mug of something warm. I'm leaving after Thanksgiving, he said. I'll figure things out somewhere else. I didn't ask why. The night before the holiday, I stayed up late cleaning, baking, distracting myself with burnt pecan pie crust and mismatched cutlery. He wandered in around midnight, offering to help. I said no. He lingered. Said nothing. And yet I heard everything. The front door opened with a bang. I forgot the blueprints. My husband stood there, wind-blown, out of breath, smiling. Didn't mean to scare you. Be out in a sec. He grabbed the roll of paper off the entryway table and disappeared just as quickly as he came. We both stood still. Silence. Then a laugh. Mine. Dry and cracked. I walked past him, turned off the light, and whispered, "Good night." I didn't look back. But I knew everything had changed. The next morning, he kissed me on the cheek in front of my husband. And no one said a word. The front door shut behind my husband with a gust of cold air and the lingering smell of gasoline on his coat. His voice echoed once more, "Love you," before the engine started outside and faded into the distance. I stood in the hallway holding a dish towel I hadn't used, frozen by how effortlessly everything almost collapsed an hour earlier. I didn't even glance toward the kitchen where he still stood, barely breathing. We stayed in separate rooms that night. Or at least I did. I don't know if he slept. The next morning came too fast, dragged forward by the noise of trucks from the neighbor's driveway. I drank my coffee faster than usual and pulled my hair into a bun with shaky fingers. I told myself we would keep things normal. That nothing had changed. We were installing the final bass cabinets when the music from his Bluetooth speaker cut out. Dead battery, he muttered, reaching to the counter to plug it in again. His hand brushed the recipe box I hadn't touched in years. He looked at it like it was sacred. I snatched it away. Don't touch that. He stepped back, holding up both hands like I was a wild animal cornered. We didn't speak again until the early afternoon. A trip to Lowe's was unavoidable. He drove. I sat stiffly in the passenger seat, hands clenched under my coat. I didn't want to be alone with him. I didn't want to be anywhere else either. He asked what I thought about brass handles. I shrugged. He said matte black was getting overdone. I nodded. We picked out drawer pulls and a faucet like strangers choosing a coffin lining. We didn't look each other in the eye once. In the paint aisle, he tossed me a can of matte finish top coat. "This is the one you liked," he said flatly. I caught it without a word. Then, he grabbed the cart and rolled it toward checkout. It started snowing by the time we stepped outside. There was a long line at the register. We stood silently behind a woman arguing with the cashier over a returned vacuum. As her voice rose, I stared at the color display behind her: apple blossom, colonial cream, burnished mahogany. I used to think names like that were romantic. Back home, we unloaded in silence. I busied myself peeling off the barcode stickers and aligning the handles on the counter like it mattered. He brought me a bottle of water. I didn't take it. The silence cracked around 4 in the afternoon. He dropped a screwdriver on the tile, metal clanging against ceramic, and it made me flinch. He finally said it. "We can't pretend it didn't happen." I didn't answer. Instead, I moved to the window, watched a squirrel digging in the mulch. "He'll be back tomorrow night," I said finally. "I know." That was all. The work resumed. We installed 2 drawers. Adjusted one that stuck. The rhythm of the screwdriver filled the silence again. Our hands brushed as we reached for the same bracket. We both stopped. I turned, and for a moment, we didn't move. We kissed. No words followed. None were needed. We stepped away, breath shallow, and returned to opposite sides of the kitchen. My heart pounded as if I'd run 5 blocks. It started snowing harder. Around 6 p.m., we called it for the night. I made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, the kind from the can that my husband always called cheap comfort. We ate in the living room, TV muted. I glanced at him occasionally. He never looked back. After dinner, he disappeared into the guest room. I paced the hallway 3 times before going to bed. The house creaked under the weight of falling snow and unsaid things. By midnight, I was wide awake. I heard the floor creak near the stairs and sat up, pulse tight in my throat. Footsteps, retreating. I stayed in bed until the morning light bled through the curtains. The next day was Thanksgiving Eve. My husband called from the road just before noon. Said traffic was a nightmare but he'd make it in time for dinner. I said we'd save him a plate. Then came the idea, his brother suggested we finish the backsplash. We should wrap it all before he gets home. Clean reveal. It made sense. He made me laugh again that day. Just once. When he dropped an entire box of backsplash tiles and shouted, "They're fine." Just emotionally scarred. That laugh was a mistake. Because I didn't want to feel better. We pushed through the work like we were on deadline for a reality show. We were covered in grout and sweat by the time the sun dipped behind the snowy pines. The kitchen looked finished. Warm. Real. Like someone lived here who believed in fresh starts. The house was quiet again. I poured myself a glass of wine. He opened a beer. We sat on opposite ends of the room, legs stretched out, watching the under cabinet lighting glow against the new tile. He looked over, but said nothing. It wasn't romantic. It was heavier than that. I stood first. He didn't move. Upstairs, I washed my face slowly, trying to make sense of how far we'd fallen into this gray zone. I changed into a sweatshirt and socks, paced the bedroom, then headed back down with the excuse of checking the lock on the back door. He was standing at the island. There was no music, no noise, just the hum of the fridge and the storm outside pushing snow against the windows. He turned to say something. I think it was my name. The front door swung open. My husband stepped in, cheeks red, arms full of bags from Costco. Surprise! I brought pies. I froze mid-step. He kissed me on the cheek, squeezed my shoulder. Place looks amazing. You two really did it. I smiled. It cracked at the edges. Behind him, his brother slowly closed the drawer he'd been leaning on. Nodded. Quiet. Controlled. They both headed to the kitchen. I stepped aside. While unpacking, my husband talked about the awful turnpike traffic, the lady at the gas station with 12 cats in her RV, the guy who offered to sell him a turkey out of a cooler. I smiled, nodded, asked questions. He opened the fridge to put the pies away. That's when it happened. He pulled out a bottle of cranberry ginger ale and turned, holding it up. Did you pick this? I shook my head. No. We both looked at his brother. He hesitated for a half-second. Then said, thought she might like it. My husband smiled. Good choice. Then he turned his back again. The silence that followed felt louder than any words spoken that night. I left the room to check on the laundry. I didn't come back for 20 minutes. When I returned, both men were watching the game in the den, laughing over some old memory. I walked behind the couch, watched their backs. Same posture. Same shoulders. Same blood. Only one of them knew the truth. Only one of them didn't. But it was the neighbor's voice I heard next, outside, calling out a cheerful happy early Thanksgiving, from the yard. And I realized. He'd seen us. He'd seen more than I wanted anyone to see. I pretended not to hear the neighbor's voice. Instead, I grabbed a dish towel and started wiping down a perfectly clean countertop, trying to bury the sudden rise in my chest. My husband was laughing in the other room, voice full of nostalgia and nothing resembling suspicion. I told myself it was fine. That the neighbor was just being neighborly. That maybe he hadn't seen anything. That it didn't matter. But something inside me knew that it did. The next morning came with the clatter of pans and the scent of breakfast sausage. I found the two of them already halfway through cooking. My husband flipping eggs like it was the 1950s. His brother chopping scallions like he belonged there. I poured coffee and leaned against the wall, trying to smile. My husband kissed my temple, thanking me for the beautiful kitchen. Said it felt like home again. His brother looked down at the cutting board. I cleaned all morning. Scrubbed baseboards that hadn't seen daylight in years. Organized drawers, rearranged silverware, stacked linens in neat geometric piles. Anything to stay busy. Anything not to feel. That afternoon, I stepped out to pick up cinnamon rolls from the bakery up the road. A tradition, or at least something to make the holiday feel like one. When I got back, our neighbor was standing in the yard with a cup of coffee, talking to my husband. I watched from the car a few moments longer than I should have. They laughed. The casual kind. My stomach nodded. I walked up slowly, pretending I hadn't seen anything. My husband waved me over. He's been telling me we should start charging people to tour the kitchen. The neighbor smiled. You two have been busy. Or, the three of you, rather. That pause. That awful, hanging pause. My husband chuckled, oblivious. We make a good team. Later that night, the neighbor dropped off a tin of cranberry biscotti, just like last year. I thanked him, smiled, closed the door. He didn't leave the porch right away. I heard the creak of the step as he shifted his weight. Then, beautiful finish on that backsplash. Really elegant work. His voice was casual, but the tone was surgical. I closed the blinds. Inside, they were watching football again. I sat on the arm of the couch, eating a biscotti that tasted like sawdust. My husband nudged me with his foot. You okay? I nodded. Just tired. You've done so much. It's okay to rest, you know. I almost laughed. By bedtime, the tension in the house was thick enough to trip over. My husband went to bed early, exhausted from wine and turkey and 3 straight hours of reruns. His brother stayed up in the kitchen, finishing a glass of something dark. I lingered in the hallway. Part of me wanted to disappear into bed and pretend the week had never happened. But my feet moved anyway. He looked up when I entered, like he'd been waiting. We kissed. Neither of us spoke. I pulled away first. Walked to the sink. He stayed seated, his hand gripping the stem of the glass too tightly. The air between us felt splintered. Like anything we said now would break it all open. I left without saying goodnight. The next morning came with cold air and frozen ground. My husband packed up for another quick project across the state line. Just 2 nights, he said, fastening his overnight bag. You'll have the house to yourself for once. He kissed my forehead. He didn't look me in the eyes. When he drove off, the silence felt wrong. Not peaceful, empty. I made coffee. Didn't drink it. Stared at the tile. The one we'd argued about. The one we'd chosen together. The one we kissed against. I walked outside to clear my head. That's when I saw the neighbor standing in his driveway, phone in hand, looking directly at me. Not waving. Not smiling. Just standing. I walked back inside. He came over an hour later, knocked on the door like he was dropping off a book or asking for a rake. When I opened it, he held nothing. He leaned slightly against the doorway, not entering. Just checking in. Things look different around here. I said nothing. He took a breath, then added, you know, we have one of those smart doorbells now. Great quality. Catches everything. Day or night. My heart froze. He smiled. Tipped his head. Have a good day. He walked away without looking back. I stood there until my legs felt numb. Then I shut the door. Locked it. Pulled every curtain. His brother came into the kitchen later with a basket of fresh tools. Thought I'd fix that drawer that sticks. I didn't respond. I sat at the table and stared at my coffee cup. He looked at me, puzzled. What happened? I told him about the neighbor. His face dropped in slow motion. Like he already knew what I was going to say. You think he saw? He asked. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He sat across from me. Leaned in. We didn't do anything wrong. I laughed. One sharp exhale. We didn't do anything right either. The rest of the day blurred. We patched a wall. He fixed the drawer. I regrouted a corner of tile that didn't need it. We didn't speak again. Until evening. He made pasta. We didn't eat it. I poured wine. It went untouched. The entire house felt paused. Finally, I stood by the sliding door, looking into the neighbor's yard. Christmas lights blinked around his porch. Then I turned around and saw the look on his brother's face. A mix of guilt. Of defeat. And something else. He reached into the drawer. Pulled out a folded piece of paper. Quietly laid it on the counter. I opened it. It was a still image. Printed. Grainy but clear. Me. Him. By the garbage cans. Our faces just inches apart. Frozen mid-breath. Before the kiss. But too close to explain. I looked up slowly. I found it in the mailbox, he said. No note. No sender. We both stood there, frozen. Neither of us spoke. The kitchen lights flickered once. Just once. Then everything went dark. The lights flickered once, and then everything dropped into sudden darkness. No warning hum, no sputter, just the full weight of silence pressing down over the house. For a long moment, we didn't move. The only sound was the soft tick of the kitchen clock and the distant hiss of snow tapping against the windows. I looked toward the ceiling, as if expecting it to give me answers. It didn't. He stood still, one hand still hovering near the drawer he had closed just moments before. The printed photo with our faces too close sat abandoned on the counter between us, its edges curling upward slightly, like it was trying to disappear. The power didn't come back. I moved first, walking toward the hallway closet where we kept the emergency candles. The flashlight we usually kept there was gone. I grabbed a small tin with 3 old tea lights and a half-empty box of matches and walked back into the kitchen. He was lighting the gas burner with a long lighter, coaxing out a tiny blue flame. "I think the storm knocked it out," I said. "Yeah." That was all. We set candles around the kitchen, on the counter, on the windowsill, beside the sink. Their glow was faint and warm and made everything look older, softer, like we'd stepped back in time. The fridge clicked, making its usual settling noises. The air felt thinner. We sat across from each other at the kitchen island, the space between us impossibly dense. He didn't look at the photo again. Neither did I. It was still there, mocking us. Outside, the wind picked up. A tree branch scraped along the side of the house. I closed my eyes. When I opened them again, he was staring directly at me. "I don't think we come back from this," he said quietly. "I know." Another silence. Then a laugh, not a real one, just the kind you let slip when you've exhausted every other reaction. He got up and grabbed 2 mugs, filling them with lukewarm water from the kettle. We drank like we were strangers again, forced to share space by some poorly written script. By 8 o'clock, the storm had gotten worse. The snow came sideways, slapping the windows, whiting out the world beyond our street. The forecast had warned about this. I hadn't believed it. I rarely did. We layered up in silence. I pulled on thick socks, he zipped a fleece over his t-shirt. I handed him a blanket from the linen closet. He took it without a word. The house began to creak more than usual. One of the upstairs vents groaned, and somewhere, the wind pried at a window frame. For a moment, I imagined it ripping the roof straight off and exposing us to the world. Just us and our sins in the open air. He suggested we sleep downstairs, just in case. I nodded. We made separate beds on the living room floor. I laid on the couch, trying not to feel anything. The candles flickered low in the kitchen. His silhouette was motionless beneath a borrowed comforter. The world outside raged, but inside the house, we held still. Until he whispered, "I'm sorry." I didn't answer. I couldn't. By midnight, the storm had peaked. The windows rattled, the gutters trembled, and the cold seeped through every corner. The power was still out. The house was breathing with us. At some point, I sat up and walked into the kitchen. He followed. We didn't speak. We spent night together. I woke early. Before sunrise. The house was silent. Still dark. But the storm had passed. The power was still out. I walked through the kitchen barefoot, the tile cold under my feet. The photo was gone from the counter. I didn't ask where it went. He was sitting by the window, arms folded across his knees, staring into the gray morning. "I'll leave today," he said. I nodded. It was Thanksgiving Day. By noon, the electricity came back with a groan and a flash. The coffee machine beeped to life, and the refrigerator gave its usual low hum. The world restarted without warning. I stood in the kitchen trying to look busy. Rearranging silverware. Wiping counters. Avoiding every mirror. He was upstairs packing. I didn't ask where he was going. I didn't ask if he'd be back. By 2, the snowplow had cleared the street. My husband called to say he was 2 hours away. His voice was light, excited. He told me to start preheating the oven, that he'd bring the turkey from the market near his hotel. I said okay. At 3, the doorbell rang. I opened it, expecting a neighbor, maybe someone checking in on the storm. Instead, it was the neighbor. He smiled politely, held out a small holiday tin. Thought you might want this. Inside was peppermint bark wrapped in foil. Nothing unusual. But the way he looked at me wasn't casual. And then, before turning to leave, he said, "Nice new counters. They look good from the yard." My throat went dry. He walked off like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't just confirmed every fear I'd buried under snow and silence and guilt. I closed the door slowly. Back in the kitchen, I stood there frozen, staring at the peppermint tin in my hands. Then the front door opened again. My husband, red-cheeked and wind-blown, held up a giant golden turkey like a prize. "Dinner is saved." He kissed my cheek. His brother came downstairs, bag over his shoulder. "I'm heading out," he said. "Thanks for everything." My husband clapped him on the back. "You sure? We've got enough food for an army." He hesitated. "I've got a long drive." I walked him to the door. Neither of us spoke. But as I closed it behind him, I realized something had shifted in my husband's face. A flicker, just a blink, of something unspoken. He turned to me, smiling, turkey in hand. "You ready for dinner?" And then I saw it. A flash of light through the front window. A phone screen, raised high. The neighbor across the street. Recording. Not us. Just watching. He was still standing on the other side of the street. The neighbor. The same smug, unreadable expression. One hand in his pocket, the other holding his phone, just high enough. Not filming. Not waving. Not talking. Just watching. I blinked and looked away, forcing my expression to stay flat as I closed the door behind me. My husband was already in the kitchen, humming, unloading store-bought pies from the brown paper bags like this was just another Thursday. I carried the peppermint tin from earlier to the trash and buried it beneath crumpled foil and a paper towel soaked in cranberry juice. Then I washed my hands like I could scrub away the noise building in my head. He didn't ask me anything. He didn't notice anything. He went on setting the table, asking if I'd light the candles in the dining room. I said I would. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. I lit the candles. I poured the wine. I watched him unwrap the turkey, slice it like a chef, plate it like he'd practiced. His brother hadn't answered my message. I'd texted him half an hour ago. No reply. We sat. Just the two of us. He gave a short, distracted toast about gratitude and warmth and starting fresh. I nodded, smiled, took a sip, and wondered how many ways that phrase could be twisted. Dinner was a performance. We complimented the food. I asked about his project. He asked if I was still thinking of restarting the blog. I said maybe. Neither of us touched the pumpkin pie. The pie dish sat there cooling under a haze of silence while the world outside shifted. After dinner, he went to load the dishwasher. I slipped outside with the excuse of grabbing the winter wreath from the porch. The air was colder than expected. Sharp. Still, the neighbor's lights were off. But I didn't believe for a second that he wasn't awake. I stood on the porch longer than I needed to, holding the wreath but not moving. My thoughts were circling the same questions. What did he want? Did he see more than I thought? Did he already show someone else? I went inside, hung the wreath without thinking, and stood in the hallway watching my husband rinse wine glasses. The kitchen looked so clean. So new. So dishonest. Later, while he watched TV upstairs, I stayed behind in the laundry room, sorting nothing. A load of towels sat in the dryer, untouched. I folded them slowly, mechanically. One. Then another. As I reached the bottom of the basket, something caught my eye. It was just paper. Plain. Folded 3 times. I hadn't seen it before. I unfolded it. It was a photo. The same one. From before. But not the same copy. It was printed on thicker paper now. A higher resolution. Clearer. It hadn't been mailed. It hadn't been crumpled. It was new. There was no note. Just the photo. Just us. I stared at it so long that the corners curled under my fingertips. Then I shoved it between 2 towels and put the basket back under the counter. I slept restlessly that night. He was warm beside me, one hand resting across his chest, rising and falling slowly. I counted each breath until morning. The next day was quieter. We drove together to a garden center for winter greens. He wanted to hang garlands along the porch rail. I went along with it. Smiled for the clerk. Made polite small talk in the car. I didn't look at the neighbor's house when we pulled into the driveway. By the afternoon, my husband had gone out again to help a buddy with his gutters before the freeze. I stayed behind and raked the last of the wet leaves into piles, just for something to do. When I carried the rake toward the shed, I saw it. A flash of blue under the workbench. Another photo. This one was folded into a square. Tucked inside a plastic sleeve. Identical image. Same angle. Same moment. Same silence. I didn't take it inside. I left it exactly where it was. That evening, I baked banana bread. Not because we needed it, but because it gave my hands something to do. When he got home, he told me it smelled like my mother's house and kissed my forehead. I nodded, setting the loaf to cool. We sat on the couch with holiday lights blinking around the window frame. A local channel was playing Miracle on 34th Street. He said it had always been his mom's favorite. I thought about the towel basket. The shed. The neighbor's phone screen. The next day was Sunday. I offered to return something to the hardware store, a set of cabinet hinges we never used. He said he could go with me, but I insisted it was a quick trip. Just 10 minutes down the road. I didn't go to the hardware store. I parked in front of the neighbor's house. The driveway was empty. I waited. 5 minutes. Then 10. He came out the side gate, holding a shovel, pretending to be surprised. "You forgot something?" I asked. He paused. Then smiled. "You're going to have to be more specific." I got out of the car. Closed the door gently. "What do you want?" I asked. He wiped his hands on his jacket. "Nothing. But if I were you, I'd want to know what's coming." I stared at him. He tilted his head slightly. "It's not personal." I shook my head, my voice flat. "You printed them." He didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it either. "You don't want anything?" I asked again. "No," he said. "But someone else might." That sentence hung there, thick in the air. I walked back to the car, hands shaking. Drove home. Tried to act normal. Tried to smile. Tried to breathe. The next morning, I came downstairs early. My husband was already up, standing by the kitchen island. He was holding something. A piece of paper. My chest clenched before I even saw it. But it wasn't the photo. It was a receipt. He looked at me, puzzled. Did you stop at the gas station in Oak Ridge yesterday? I hesitated. No, I said. He turned the receipt over. Then why was your debit card used there at 3:47? My mind raced. I hadn't used my card. Not anywhere. Not at all. He handed it to me. I took it with numb fingers. And then I saw it. The charge wasn't mine. It wasn't his either. It was his brother's. My breath caught. The same bank account. The same card number. The same line of access. A duplicate card. One I never gave him. One I didn't know he had. And in that moment, something inside me cracked. Because it meant only one thing. He hadn't left. He hadn't left. The receipt shook slightly in my hand as if reacting to the weight of the realization. I read the time again. 3:47 p.m. Oak Ridge. Gas station. I hadn't been there. My husband hadn't been there. But someone had used a card that traced back to our shared account. He stood across from me, waiting for something. A simple answer, maybe. A logical explanation. The fact that I had none felt like a spotlight on my chest. I folded the receipt in half, then again, and tucked it into the drawer near the stove. I don't know, I said, too quickly. He looked at me. Not suspicious. Just confused. Could it be a mistake? Maybe. I reached for a sponge and started scrubbing a spotless section of countertop, desperate to keep my hands busy. He lingered a few more seconds, then nodded, still holding on to some version of belief that made sense to him. Well, I'll check with the bank later. I nodded. Yeah, probably just a mix-up. He kissed my cheek before grabbing his keys. Be back in a few. I've gotta drop the snowblower at Jerry's. The door shut behind him. I stood frozen for 10 seconds, then ran upstairs, yanked open the closet door in the guest room, and checked the bottom drawer. Empty. No bag. No sweatshirt. No spare shoes. I turned and opened the linen closet. Towels. Sheets. Nothing out of place. Then I checked the attic door. Still latched. I climbed up anyway. Boxes. Old holiday decorations. A broken lamp. No signs of anything recent. I stayed up there longer than I needed to, just sitting in the dust and silence, waiting for my brain to stop spinning. He hadn't left. But where was he? And what did he know? That night, I made chili. The same recipe I always made when I didn't know what else to do. Something about stirring and simmering calmed the nerves. My husband came home in good spirits, talking about the guy at Jerry's who slipped on ice and blamed the carburetor. I laughed at the right moment, asked the right questions, ladled bowls like nothing in the world had shifted. He didn't mention the receipt again. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. At bedtime, I checked the locks on every door. Front. Back. Side. Garage. All sealed. Still, I didn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I heard something. A floorboard. Not a crash. Just pressure. Subtle. I sat up, holding my breath, eyes fixed on the dark doorway. No movement. After a minute, I got up and stepped into the hallway. Still nothing. I walked slowly toward the kitchen, barefoot on cold tile, and stood still in the doorway. Empty. The air smelled faintly of pine cleaner. Then I noticed it. The photo. Not on the counter. Not on the floor. But on the fridge. Held by a magnet. My heart stopped. Same photo. Same angle. Same moment. Our faces too close to explain. But now, in my kitchen. Where my husband could see it. I tore it down in silence and tucked it under my shirt. Upstairs, he was still asleep. I went to the laundry room. Opened the cabinet under the sink. Found a box of old receipts and coupons. Tore the photo into pieces so small they curled under my fingers. Flushed half of it. Burned the rest in a candle by the sink. In the morning, I pretended to oversleep. He brought me coffee and kissed my forehead. "You were out cold." I smiled weakly and thanked him. He went downstairs to start working on the porch lights. Christmas was creeping in, and he wanted it to look festive before the neighbors beat us to it. When he left again around noon to pick up more lights from the hardware store, I walked straight to the neighbor's house and knocked. No answer. I knocked again. Firmer. Still nothing. I tried the side gate. It was locked. Just as I turned to leave, I caught sight of something strange behind his fence, trash bags lined up beside the shed. 6 of them. One torn at the top. I couldn't explain why, but something pulled me toward it. I walked around, down the path between our yards, heart pounding in my chest. When I reached the side of the fence, I saw it clearly. The torn bag wasn't trash. It was full of shredded photos. All the same size. All glossy. Some pieces were face up. Some had my face. Others had his. I turned and walked away without looking back. Without touching anything. My hands were ice. I stayed outside, pacing the backyard, replaying it all. Why keep the photos? Why here? Why so many? And why now? I went inside and locked every door. Then I opened the drawer in the hallway where my husband kept spare tools, tape, scissors, and receipts. I dug through slowly. One item at a time. At the bottom, folded neatly in an envelope, was something I never expected. A copy of the same photo. The same. Crisp. Unshredded. On the back, in familiar handwriting, just 3 words. I already knew. I stood frozen, holding it with trembling hands, the room closing in around me. The key rack beside the door had only one set missing. And it wasn't mine. I stood by the door staring at the empty slot where the spare car key usually hung. It wasn't a mistake. I checked again, twice, then a third time, this time more slowly, touching every other hook just to prove it wasn't my nerves playing games. One set missing. His. But he'd said he was gone. Had stood in that hallway with a bag slung over his shoulder and thanked us both like it was goodbye. I had watched him walk away. I'd closed the door myself. And yet the key was gone. I tucked the envelope back where I found it, quietly, pressing it beneath the stack of receipts like a secret I could convince myself didn't exist. Then I opened the fridge, pulled out a container of soup I had no intention of eating, and set it on the counter just in case anyone walked in. 2 minutes later, my husband did. He was flushed from the cold, snow still melting in his hair, the scent of Christmas trees trailing behind him. "They've got the best wreaths at the farm stand this year," he said, placing a fresh pine wreath on the table. "Whole driveway smells like Vermont." I smiled. Said it looked beautiful. He offered me a mug of cider from his thermos. I declined, said I wasn't feeling well. He didn't press. The rest of the day passed like a rerun of the same show we'd been playing for weeks. We wrapped a few early presents. He played old jazz vinyls in the living room. I made cookies I didn't taste. The tree lights blinked with artificial cheer while my thoughts clawed at every shadow. That night, when he finally fell asleep upstairs, I sat alone in the hallway with the lights off, watching the windows. There was no movement outside. No headlights. No figures. No confirmation that he was still out there. But the missing key was proof enough. And the envelope. And the photos. And the receipts. I didn't sleep. Morning came with gray skies and sleet. My husband had a meeting at the city office about a zoning permit. He left in his usual rush, coat half buttoned, muttering something about needing to pick up new gloves on the way back. I nodded, waved, closed the door, and locked it. Then I went straight to the garage. His car was gone. The one he supposedly drove off in 2 chapters ago. But now I noticed something I hadn't before. The storage cabinet along the back wall was cracked open an inch. That cabinet had been shut for years. No reason to open it, just held old paint cans, rusted tools, things that never got used. I walked over and opened it fully. Empty paint cans. Old socket sets. And on the bottom shelf, a duffel bag. His. I pulled it out. Heavy. Still zipped. Inside, 2 shirts, a shaving kit, a box of protein bars, and 3 changes of socks. No coat. No shoes. Nothing to suggest someone had really gone anywhere. He hadn't left. He was still here. Somewhere. But where? I repacked the bag, put it back exactly how I'd found it, and closed the cabinet slowly, careful not to let the metal creak. Then I went back into the house, bolted the garage door, and stood in the hallway trying to understand what kind of game I was in the middle of. Later that day, I drove to the cafe on Main, the one with the antique books lining the walls and the draft that always made it feel a little colder than it should. I sat in the back booth, ordered a tea I wouldn't drink, and waited. And at exactly 1:15 p.m., he walked in. No disguise. No hood. No attempt to avoid me. He sat down like he was early to a meeting, rested his hands flat on the table, and waited for me to speak. I didn't. Finally, he looked at me and said, "I thought you'd come sooner." My voice was lower than I expected. "You never left." He nodded. I tried. I didn't ask what that meant. Instead, I asked why he had the photos. He didn't flinch. To remember what I ruined. I looked at him for a long time. Then why are they showing up in my house? I didn't put them there. He said it so plainly, so calmly, that for a second I almost believed him. Then I asked what I really came to ask. Why did you write it? He blinked. Write what? The note on the photo. I already knew. That was your handwriting. He shook his head once. Slowly. I never wrote that. We stared at each other across the table, the distance between us too full to cross. I left before he could say anything else. Back home, the air felt thinner. My husband was already there, sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through a pile of utility bills. He asked me how the tea shop was. I said it was quiet. He nodded and held up a piece of paper. Did you know our water bill doubled this month? I looked at it blankly. No. He shrugged. Probably a leak. I'll check the basement tomorrow. I nodded and excused myself. Upstairs, I opened the guest room closet again. And this time, I looked under the bed. I didn't know what I expected, maybe nothing. Maybe just to confirm I was losing it. But taped to the underside of the bed frame was a flash drive. I stared at it, pulse thudding in my ears. Reached for it. Held it in my hand. It was labeled with a single strip of masking tape. 3 words written in blocky, nervous handwriting. Play. This. Last. I didn't plug it in. I put it in my coat pocket. And that night, during dinner, I asked my husband the question that had been waiting all week. What was the best lie you've ever told me? He looked up from his plate. And smiled. The kind of smile you save for moments when you're holding cards no one else knows about. Then he said, that I didn't already know. His words echoed through the kitchen like they'd been rehearsed for weeks, that I didn't already know. He said it so calmly, so casually, like he was just commenting on the weather or asking for more salt. I froze, spoon halfway to my mouth, heartbeat flooding my ears. He didn't look away. He didn't smile either, not really. His face stayed still, waiting for a reaction I couldn't seem to form. The room felt suddenly too small, the ceiling too low, the lights too bright. I forced myself to chew, to swallow, to blink. Then I got up and walked over to the sink, slowly rinsing off my hands under water that ran colder than it should have. He didn't follow. Didn't say anything more. Just let the silence hang there like a curtain that wouldn't fall. Later, I went upstairs and sat on the edge of our bed for nearly half an hour before pulling the flash drive from my coat pocket. I didn't have a plan for it. I didn't even know if I'd use it. But my hands moved on their own. I slid it into the side port of my old laptop, the one I rarely touched anymore. The one he never used. It blinked red once, then green. The screen filled with a single file. No title. No icon. Just a timestamp. I hesitated, fingers hovering above the trackpad, heart pressing hard against my ribs. I double-clicked. For a moment, nothing. Then a video began, low quality, handheld, unsteady. It was our kitchen. Weeks ago. Before the new backsplash. Before the paint dried. I was standing by the stove, laughing. He, the brother, was out of frame but his voice was there, unmistakable. Something about cabinet measurements. I said something back, some small joke, and then... there it was. The moment before. Not the kiss. Not anything inappropriate. Just the look. That single look. Paused in the air between us like smoke from a match. The screen went black. Then a second clip began. A different angle. Same room. Same people. But this time, the voice wasn't his. It was my husband's. Off camera. Slightly breathless. He was recording. But not like surveillance. Not hidden. The camera was moving intentionally. Following the space. He was documenting the renovation. And us. There was a quiet moment. A pause in the footage. And then he said, almost under his breath, I think she's already gone. The screen froze. Then faded to black. That was it. I pulled the drive out, gently, and set it down on the nightstand. My hands were ice cold. He knew. Not from rumors. Not from proof. He felt it. He'd known all along, and instead of confrontation, he waited. Observed. Let it play out like a scene he couldn't stop but didn't want to interrupt either. Downstairs, I heard the front door open. He'd gone out after dinner to pick up something for the tree, twine, hooks, maybe ribbon. He called up, you still want that cocoa? I called back, yeah. 10 minutes later, he brought it to me. I was sitting in the living room now, the flash drive out of sight, the laptop shut. He handed me the mug and sat across from me. We sipped quietly, the room lit only by the soft blinking of the tree lights and the glow from the fireplace. Neither of us said much. He leaned back in the chair, cradling his mug, eyes scanning the ornaments. I kept thinking we'd get through it, he said. Even after everything. I stared at the steam rising from my cup. But some things, he continued, don't go back the way they were. They just shift into something else. I didn't speak. He stood, stretched his arms. I've got an early day tomorrow. Gonna turn in. I nodded. He left the room. I sat there for another hour. Then, on instinct, I walked to the back door, opened it quietly, and stepped onto the porch. The cold hit hard, sharp and cutting. The neighbor's house was quiet. No lights. No signs. But a single envelope rested at the edge of our doormat. White. Blank. No name. I picked it up slowly. Inside was a photo. Not of me. Not of him. But of the two of them. Laughing. Together. Somewhere else. Somewhere recent. The timestamp was yesterday. And beneath it, scribbled in the corner. Guess it's not just you. My vision blurred. I stared at the paper for a long time, the air slicing my lungs. The door creaked behind me. I turned. He stood there, barefoot, no expression. I was wondering how long it would take you to find that. I didn't answer. He took the photo from my hand, glanced at it once, then tore it clean down the middle. I think we're done pretending, he said. Then he walked back inside. The door closed behind him. And I was alone on the porch, holding half a memory.